always been intrigued by the selection process, the so-called buds process, right? Because carrying logs and getting in cold water and all that, that's not really how the work is. That's really not what the work is about. So the selection process is interesting because everyone shows up fit, motivated, and convinced that they're not going to quit. Everybody is absolutely convinced. And then a very small subset of them make it through. And I'd be willing to bet that the ones that make it through, of course, they're gritty and resilient, but they all are essentially, right? So that's necessary but not sufficient, obviously. Otherwise, everyone would make it through. The people that make it through somehow are able to tap into a process. Maybe it's a reward process. Maybe it's through self-punishment. Maybe it's through self-reward in the positive sense. But they're able to control something inside an environment that is not controlled by them. It's controlled by the instructors. And I've always been struck by the fact that in order to get through, you just have to not quit. Remember, people aren't being deselected. They're not saying, get out of here, you're not good enough, people are deciding that for themselves. Right. And so it's interesting because it brings about a real world experiment of people who are quitting. And I believe they're quitting because they can't manage these neurotransmitters. And when I say manage, I think that the people that get through, knowing some of these people quite well, had an internal process by which they could reward themselves for doing something that might have just looked trivial to everybody else, but it gave them more gas, more energy. Right? And what's interesting is the process, the kind of unconscious genius of the buds process is that they've picked two sensory events that are across the board challenging for everybody. It's cold water and sleep deprivation. And so sleep deprivation is the best way that you can pull somebody down from their ability to analyze duration, path, and outcome and reward themselves. Sleep deprivation is the way in which you essentially pull apart the nervous system and the way that it wants to function, because it's very easy, again, rested to do all this. But so what they do is they're sleep deprived people, they put them in cold water. They're trying to get them more in touch with the way that they feel inside than what they need to do in response to the external demands. Right. And everyone I know that's made it through that process did it slightly differently, but I'll tell you how they didn't do it. They didn't do it through sheer grit and determination. They did it through attaching a sense of meaning. They did it by micro slicing the day, or slicing the day into a series of meals that they just needed to get to, and then rewarding themselves for getting to that next milestone. These circuits are not unique to people who run ultras or people that make it through, stringent filter, special operations command. Most people, when they don't like what they feel, they start negotiating sensation, which will never work. They start trying to control their perception, which is hard, right? They're like, oh, I'm not going to think about that, or I'll think about it differently. Very hard to control the mind with the mind. And this is really the holy grail of neuroscience, is how can I modify my brain? Well, you modify it by placing yourself into discomfort and using that as a propeller to move you into action.